1878, Arizona Territory. The merciless sun beat down on Sarah Caldwell as she stood before the towering figure known only as the Giant. His reputation preceded him, a solitary Apache warrior of extraordinary size and strength who had chosen exile over reservation life. Desperation had driven her here, to this remote canyon where few dared venture. Behind her lay the smoldering remains of her homestead, burned by men who would return to claim more than just land. Before her stood perhaps her only chance at survival. "I give you strong sons," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You give me safety." Could a bargain born of desperation possibly grow into something neither of them ever expected to find in this harsh, unforgiving land? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Giant's dark eyes narrowed as he studied the woman before him. She was slender but not frail, with determination etched into the lines of her sun-weathered face. Her clothes, though dusty from travel, spoke of Eastern refinement now faded by frontier hardship. Most striking was what she carried. A small leather satchel, a canteen, and a faded photograph in a tarnished silver frame. "Why would I want sons from a white woman?" he finally asked in halting English. Sarah's fingers tightened around the photograph, the last remnant of her previous life. In it, a younger, softer version of herself stood beside Thomas Caldwell, her late husband. His professor's smile beamed with optimism as they posed before departing Boston for Arizona Territory. Thomas had been certain his knowledge of geology would make their fortune in the West. Instead, it had cost him his life. "Because I have nowhere else to go," she answered plainly. "And because I can help you survive here better than you do alone." 3 weeks ago, Sarah had been tending her small garden when riders from the Pinalino Mining Company arrived. Their foreman, Fletcher, had presented papers claiming rights to the copper deposits beneath her land. When Thomas had discovered those deposits 2 years earlier, he'd filed a modest claim, enough to support them, not the massive operation the company envisioned. "Your husband's dead," Fletcher had told her, tobacco juice staining his beard. "No place for a woman to work a claim alone. Companies offering fair compensation." The fair compensation wouldn't have gotten her halfway back east. When she refused, the men had returned that night. She'd fled into the darkness as flames consumed the cabin Thomas had built with his own hands. For days she'd hidden in the hills, watching from a distance as company men searched for her. Local gossip had led her to stories of the Giant, an Apache who'd refused reservation life and carved out his own territory in a hidden canyon. Some said he was 8 feet tall and ate trespassers. Others claimed he was the last of a warrior society, keeping ancient ways alive in solitude. Sarah didn't believe the tales, but she believed in his reputation for fiercely defending his territory. Exactly what she needed. "I'm a healer," she continued when he didn't respond. "I know plants which cure, which nourish. I can cook. So, read the white man's words." She gestured to his leg, where an old injury caused a slight favoring. "I can ease that pain." The Giant circled her, assessing. "Why sons? Why not just ask for protection?" "Because I offer fair exchange, not charity," Sarah replied. "I won't be beholden. And because sons would give you what you lack, a future beyond yourself. Someone to pass your ways to, your knowledge." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition perhaps. The solitary life he'd chosen suddenly reflected back at him through her words. Years stretched ahead, and then nothing. No legacy, no continuation. "How do I know you won't bring others here? White men with guns." Sarah held up the photograph. "These men killed my husband because he stood in their way. They burned everything I had." Her voice didn't waver. "I have no love for what they represent. I want only to survive them." The Giant reached for the photograph, his massive hand dwarfing the frame. He studied it, then handed it back with unexpected gentleness. "1 season," he said finally. "You stay 1 season. We see if your words are true." Sarah nodded, knowing this conditional acceptance was the best she could hope for. As she followed his towering figure into the canyon, She touched the locket hidden beneath her blouse, the one containing a small braid of Thomas's hair. She whispered a silent apology to her dead husband for the bargain she'd just made, but not for her determination to survive. Behind them, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the canyon entrance. Shadows that would soon hide them both from the world that had left them with so few choices. The canyon opened like a secret being revealed, narrow at its mouth, then widening into a sheltered valley where cottonwoods clustered around a spring-fed stream. The giant led Sarah past caves carved into the sandstone walls, some bearing ancient handprints in red ochre. His own dwelling was the largest, a deep cave enhanced by a wooden structure built across its entrance, creating a sheltered porch. Inside, Sarah discovered sparse but ordered living. Weapons hung from pegs, bows, lances, a cavalry rifle likely taken in battle. Hides covered the floor, and a central fire pit vented through a natural chimney in the rock. Most striking was the small medicine pouch hanging from a central post. Decorated with beadwork and eagle feathers, its leather darkened by years of handling. The giant gestured to a smaller adjoining cave. "You sleep there." That night, as Sarah settled onto a surprisingly comfortable bed of furs, she listened to the giant's movements in the main cave. The soft murmur of his voice reached her. Praying perhaps, or singing in a language she didn't understand. She wondered about the man behind the legend. Stories about him had circulated for years. Some settlers claimed he was an army scout who'd turned against whites after betrayal. Mexicans near the border called him El Fantasma, the ghost, for his ability to appear and disappear without trace. The Apaches themselves spoke of him with a mixture of respect and wariness. Morning brought answers, though not easily. The giant rose before dawn, disappearing into the canyon. When he returned with a freshly killed deer, Sarah had water boiling and wild onions harvested from near the stream. "You have a name," she said, "not a question. I can't call you Giant forever." He paused in his butchering. "White men call me Giant. Others many names. And what does your mother call you?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise at her insight, perhaps. "Nakohi," he finally said. "It means warrior." "My name is Sarah," she offered in return. "I know this." When she raised an eyebrow, he added, "I watched you 3 days before you came to me." As they worked, she preparing a stew with the meat he provided, Sarah observed him more carefully. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, not the impossible 8 of legend, but extraordinary nonetheless. His movements held an economy of purpose, conserving energy as desert creatures did. Though age had silvered some of his hair, his strength remained evident in every motion. "Why did you leave your people?" she asked as they ate. Nakohi was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he rose and retrieved the medicine pouch she'd noticed earlier. With reverence, he loosened its drawstrings and removed a small object wrapped in cloth. "My father was peace chief," he said, unwrapping a carved stone bear. "He believed we could live with white eyes if we showed good faith. When soldiers came to move us to San Carlos, he convinced many to go peacefully." His massive hands cradled the carving with unexpected gentleness. "At San Carlos there was sickness. No game. Bad water. My father died slowly, still believing promises." He rewrapped the bear carving. "I led 30 warriors away in the night. For 3 years we fought. One by one they died or surrendered. I remained. Alone," Sarah said softly. "Alive," he corrected. "Free." Sarah recognized the weight of his revelation. This wasn't a story he shared easily. She thought of her own father, a Boston physician who'd believed in progress and civilization, who would have viewed Nakohi's resistance as savagery rather than the profound dignity she now recognized. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. Nakohi returned the medicine pouch to its place of honor. "Your turn now. Tell me of these men who hunt you. Tell me why they burn and kill for rocks in the ground." As shadows lengthened across the canyon, Sarah explained the value of copper in the changing world beyond, how it carried the voices and power of a nation expanding westward with telegraph lines and electrical marvels. How men like Fletcher saw native peoples, widows, and small claim holders as mere obstacles to wealth. Nakohi listened intently, asking questions that revealed a keen understanding of the forces reshaping the West. When darkness fell, he added wood to the fire and said, "Tomorrow we begin." "Begin what?" "Teaching you to survive here," he answered. "If you stay one season, you must learn canyon ways." Days became a week, then two. Sarah settled into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the necessities of survival. Each morning, she woke to find Nakohi already gone. Hunting, patrolling his territory, or simply watching the land as was his habit. She established her own routines. Tending the small garden of medicinal plants she'd started near the spring, preserving meat, and making their sparse dwelling more functional. One morning, Sarah discovered a clay water jar with a crack running its length. Rather than discard it, she mixed a paste of river clay, sand, and pine resin. As she worked, careful fingers mending the breach, she found herself adding decorative patterns around the rim, concentric circles like those she'd seen on ancient pottery fragments in the canyon. Nakohi returned to find her applying the final touches. He watched silently from the doorway as she worked. "It was broken," she explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious. He crossed to examine her work, turning the jar in his large hands. "You use Apache designs. I hope that's acceptable. I've seen similar patterns on the old pieces in the canyon. My grandmother made such jars," he said, surprising her with this personal revelation. Her hands were strong even when she became old. That evening, as they ate a stew of rabbit and wild greens, Sarah noticed Nakohi watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "You have questions," she said. "Ask them." "Your bargain," he began, his deep voice rumbling in the quiet cave. "You offered sons. This means you would lie with me." Sarah had been expecting this conversation, though its directness still brought warmth to her cheeks. "Yes, that was my meaning. But you do not come to my bed. I thought," she measured her words carefully, "that we should know each other first. I'm not offering just any man's sons. I'm offering yours." Nakohi considered this. "Among my people there would be ceremony, family talks, gifts exchanged. We have no families here to speak for us," Sarah pointed out. "No," he agreed. "We speak for ourselves." A comfortable silence fell between them. Sarah realized that in just 2 weeks, their awkward arrangement had developed its own language, not just in words, but in the sharing of tasks, in mutual respect for each other's space and skills. There was an unexpected ease developing. The next day brought new lessons. Nakohi took her to the highest point of the canyon, where wind-sculpted rocks created natural fortifications overlooking the narrow entrance. "From here, I can defend against many men," he explained. "One warrior, good position, can hold off 20. Sarah studied the terrain with new eyes, seeing not just its beauty but its strategic value. "Is that why you chose this place?" "Partly." He pointed to distant landmarks, a notch in a mesa, a lightning-struck pine. "Water year-round, game trails, plants for medicine, and—" He hesitated, then finished, "It speaks to my spirit." Sarah understood. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she'd felt the canyon's power. Its sheltering walls and hidden beauty a balm to her grief-ravaged soul. As days passed, Sarah's body acclimated to the altitude and dry heat. Her hands, once soft from Eastern living, toughened. Nakohi taught her to move silently, to recognize animal signs, to find water where none seemed possible. In return, she organized their supplies, improved their cooking fire, and began treating the chronic pain in his leg with poultices that brought visible relief. One evening, she was startled when Nakohi spoke her name. He rarely addressed her directly, preferring gestures or context to carry his meaning. "Sarah," he said, testing the sound. "What does this name mean in your language?" "Princess," she answered, "or lady in some translations." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Then, with formality that seemed almost ceremonial, he said, "I accept your bargain." Sarah felt her heart quicken. "You're certain?" "Yes." His dark eyes held hers steadily. "But not tonight." 3 days from now, when the moon is full, there are preparations. That night, lying alone on her bed of furs, Sarah whispered her late husband's name one last time. A goodbye, a release. Whatever came next would be a new chapter, written in this harsh land with this extraordinary man. Not love, perhaps, but something equally powerful. Mutual need transformed into respect, and possibly, in time, something more. The morning of the third day dawned clear and promising. Sarah gathered herbs from her growing garden. Sage for cleansing, lavender for calm, yarrow for courage. The ceremony Nakohi had described was his own creation, a hybrid of Apache tradition and practical necessity, but she wanted to honor its spirit. She was heating water for washing when she heard it, a faint but unmistakable sound that didn't belong to the canyon's natural rhythm. Hoofbeats. Nakohi materialized beside her, seeming to emerge from the very rock itself. "Stay here," he commanded, retrieving his rifle from inside the cave. But Sarah had already recognized the particular gait of one of the horses. "Wait," she said, gripping his arm. "That's Fletcher's bay stallion. I'd know that step anywhere." Nakohi's expression darkened. "The man who burned your home?" Sarah nodded, fear and rage mingling in her chest. "How did they find this place?" "They follow game trails, perhaps, or tracks I left." His voice carried self-recrimination. "I've grown careless, thinking this place beyond their reach." Without discussion, they moved in practiced coordination, Sarah gathering essential items while Nakohi prepared his weapons. Within minutes, they were positioned at the high lookout point he'd shown her earlier. Below, 3 riders picked their way cautiously through the canyon entrance. Fletcher led, his unmistakable bulk shifting in the saddle as he surveyed the terrain. Behind him rode 2 company men, one carrying surveying equipment, the other a repeating rifle. "They're not here for me," Sarah realized aloud. "They don't even know I'm here. They're surveying." Nakohi's grim expression confirmed her suspicion. From his belt, he removed a brass spyglass, Spanish-made, likely taken in some long-ago skirmish. Through it, he studied the surveyor, who was already unfolding a map across his saddle horn. "Copper here too," Nakohi said, passing her the spyglass. "They always want more." Through the lens, Sarah could see the surveyor's map clearly, detailed terrain markings with shaded areas indicating mineral deposits. The largest shading covered Nakohi's canyon. "We should watch only," Nakohi advised. "Let them go. Prepare better." But as the words left his mouth, Fletcher dismounted and withdrew a small pick from his saddlebag. He approached a rock face near the spring and began chipping away, examining each fragment with greedy intensity. "He's sampling the ore," Sarah whispered. "Once he confirms what's here, they'll return with more men." The surveyor made notations on his map, precise marks that spelled doom for their sanctuary. Beside him, the rifleman remained vigilant, scanning the canyon walls as if sensing unseen eyes upon them. When Fletcher pocketed a satisfactory sample and remounted, Sarah expected the men to depart. Instead, the party continued deeper into the canyon, directly toward their dwelling. "They cannot find you here," Nakohi decided, rising to his full height. "I will draw them away." Before Sarah could protest, he had melted into the rocks, descending by a route invisible from below. She watched, heart pounding, as he positioned himself to intercept the intruders. The confrontation, when it came, was electric in its suddenness. Nakohi appeared before the riders as if summoned from the earth itself. The horses reared in panic at the imposing figure blocking their path. Even from her distant position, Sarah could see Fletcher's shock transform into recognition, not of Nakohi personally, but of what he represented. The Indian problem men like him believed had been solved through reservation policies. Words were exchanged, too distant for Sarah to hear, but the tension was visible in every line of the men's bodies. The rifleman raised his weapon, but Fletcher motioned him to lower it, saying something that made the surveyor hastily fold his map. Instead of retreating, however, Fletcher dismounted again. He withdrew something from his jacket, papers, Sarah realized with dread. legal documents likely claiming rights to the canyon just as they had to her homestead. Nakohi's reaction was measured but unmistakable. He took a single step forward, his height allowing him to look down upon Fletcher despite the latter's considerable bulk. Whatever he said caused Fletcher to step back, though his expression remained defiant. The standoff stretched for long minutes before Fletcher finally remounted, saying something over his shoulder as the party retreated toward the canyon entrance. Sarah scrambled down to meet Nakohi as he returned, his face impassive but tension radiating from his body. "What did they say?" she asked. "That paper gives them rights to dig here," he answered, his voice controlled but edged with anger. "The white man's government has sold what was never theirs to sell." "And what did you tell them?" A rare smile crossed Nakohi's face. Not of humor, but of grim determination. "That the next man to enter my canyon uninvited will not leave it." He withdrew the surveyor's map from his waistband, somehow acquired during the confrontation. "They will return," he said, studying the detailed drawings. "With more men, more guns." Sarah took the map from him, reading the notations with growing alarm. "Not just for copper. There's a proposed railroad spur line here." Her finger traced a route that would cut directly through the heart of their sanctuary. "This isn't just Fletcher anymore. This is the territory governor's development plan." Their eyes met in silent understanding. Their haven was now marked for destruction, their future together suddenly uncertain. "What now?" Sarah asked quietly. Nakohi looked toward the canyon entrance where dust still hung in the air from the departing riders. "Now," he said with quiet certainty, "we prepare for war." War, as Sarah quickly learned, meant different things to Nakohi than it had to her late husband. Thomas had spoken of military campaigns with their formal declarations and uniformed armies. Nakohi's approach was more elemental, a total commitment to survival against an encroaching threat. "You must learn to defend yourself," he told her the morning after Fletcher's visit, presenting her with a handmade bow sized for her smaller frame. "I cannot always be near." The bow was a work of art, crafted from desert ironwood and strung with sinew, its grip wrapped in soft leather for comfort. Sarah ran her fingers along its smooth curve, recognizing the hours of careful labor it represented. "Did you make this for me before? Or after yesterday?" "Before," he admitted. "It was to be part of our ceremony." The realization that he had created this gift for their intended union touched Sarah deeply. What had begun as a pragmatic arrangement was evolving into something neither had anticipated, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing trust. For 7 days they prepared. Nakohi taught her to use the bow, his massive hands adjusting her stance with surprising gentleness. Sarah proved a quick study, her determination compensating for lack of experience. By the 5th day, she could hit a prickly pear pad at 30 paces. "Good," he acknowledged when she split an arrow already embedded in the target. "But bow is last choice. First choice is here." He tapped her temple. "Outsmart them. Use canyon to protect you." Together they created hidden caches throughout the canyon, supplies, weapons, medicines, insurance against being forced from their home. Sarah contributed her knowledge of the mining company's operations, sketching the layout of similar camps she'd observed. "They always position guards here and here," she explained, marking locations on a sand map they'd created. "But they're careless about water sources." "We," Nakohi interrupted, one eyebrow raised. "Yes, we," Sarah affirmed. "This is my fight too." Something shifted in his expression then, a new evaluation. He nodded once decisively and continued their planning. In quiet moments between preparations, their personal connection deepened. Nakohi began teaching Sarah his language, Apache words for canyon features, for weapons, for the sacred. In return, she shared stories from her former life, glimpses of the Eastern world so foreign to his experience. One evening, as they ate a meal of roasted desert quail, Nakohi examined the arrow wound on his thigh that Sarah had been treating with herbs and hot compresses. "Pain is less," he acknowledged. "Your medicine is strong." "It's not just the medicine," Sarah replied. You're finally resting it properly. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Then Nakohi asked a question that surprised her with its directness. Your husband, you loved him? Sarah's hand went instinctively to the locket she still wore. Yes, she answered honestly. Very much. Yet you offer yourself to me. Life continues, she said simply. Thomas would understand survival. Nakohi considered this. Among my people, a warrior who dies wants his widow to live well, to raise strong children. He studied her face in the firelight. Perhaps your Thomas would think the same. The observation brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes, not of grief, but of recognition. Nakohi had offered her a bridge between past and present, a way to honor what was lost while embracing what might yet be. That night, with the threat of Fletcher's return hanging over them, they completed the ceremony they'd planned before the interruption. Under a blanket of desert stars, Nakohi sang songs of his people while Sarah added sage to the fire, its cleansing smoke spiraling upward. When he finally took her hand and led her to his bed of furs, their coming together was neither awkward nor merely functional. It held a reverence that transcended their original bargain, each giving and receiving with a wholeness neither had expected to find in this harsh, beautiful land. Afterward, as Sarah lay in the circle of his powerful arms, she realized the depth of the transformation occurring between them. What had begun as a transaction born of desperation was becoming something far more profound. Nakohi, she whispered, testing the intimacy of his name on her lips. He murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her skin. If they come in force, if we can't hold them back, what then? His answer was immediate and certain. Then we find another canyon, another mountain. The land is vast. We will survive. We, she noted. Not I. In the face of shared danger, they had become a unit, their fates intertwined beyond the simple terms of their original agreement. As dawn approached, Sarah drifted to sleep with a startling realization. In losing everything, she had somehow found her way home. 2 weeks passed without sign of Fletcher or his men. The reprieve allowed Sarah and Nakohi to strengthen their preparations and deepen their bond. Each day brought new understanding between them, a shared language of gestures, expressions, and growing trust. Then came the letter. Nakohi discovered it while patrolling the canyon entrance. An envelope pinned to a juniper tree with a hunting knife. The official letterhead of the Pinalino Mining Company was emblazoned across the top, the territorial governor's seal stamped beside it. He brought it to Sarah, his expression carefully neutral. Though he'd learned some written English during his time as an army scout, legal language remained beyond his comprehension. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the document, each line bringing fresh dismay. They're claiming the entire canyon under the mining law of 1872, she explained, pointing to passages as she translated. They've filed papers saying this land has been abandoned by native peoples and is open for mineral development. Nakohi's face darkened. I have never abandoned this place. They don't acknowledge you as a legal resident, Sarah continued, anger rising in her voice. Because you're not on a reservation, they're classifying you as a trespasser. The bitter irony hung between them, that he could be considered an intruder on land his people had inhabited for countless generations. There's more, she said, turning the page. They mention me by name. They're saying I've been abducted by a renegade Apache and are offering a reward for my rescue. Nakohi absorbed this with grim understanding. They make two enemies into one story. Clever. Fletcher must have recognized me during their survey, Sarah reasoned. This changes everything. They're not just coming for copper now. They're coming as rescuers. That means the territorial militia could become involved. The letter concluded with a formal notice. Representatives of the company, accompanied by the county sheriff, would arrive in 3 days' time to secure the mining claim and recover the abducted woman. That afternoon, they observed dust on the horizon, a lone rider approaching the canyon. Nakohi positioned himself out of sight while Sarah watched through the spyglass. It's Sheriff Holcomb, she reported. recognizing the man who'd done nothing when she'd reported threats against her homestead. He's alone, at least.
Ascolt, nahko he surmised.
Checking our defenses before they come in force. The sheriff didn't attempt to enter the canyon. He circled his horse at the entrance, studying the terrain with a practiced eye, then tied a notice to the same tree where the letter had been left. After he departed, Nakohi retrieved the paper, a formal eviction order with the sheriff's signature scrawled beneath the territorial seal. "We have become important," he observed dryly, to merit the sheriff himself. That night they held council around their fire, weighing options that grew more limited by the hour. "We could leave," Sarah suggested reluctantly. "Find another place, as you said. And let them take this canyon too?" Nakohi shook his head. "They will never stop taking." "Then we fight," Sarah concluded. "But we're just two against many." Nakohi was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Perhaps," he finally said. "Not just two." The following morning they rose before dawn. Nakohi packed carefully selected items: tobacco, beads, a silver bracelet traded from Mexican travelers years before. "I go to speak with shadow people," he explained. "Shadow people?" "Others who hide from white man's world. Apache families who slipped away from San Carlos. Mexican traders who cross borders without papers. Prospectors who don't register claims." He secured the pack to his back. "People who live in between." Sarah understood immediately. "You think they'll help us?" "Not for me," he admitted. "But for the canyon, perhaps. For what it represents. And—" he hesitated. "Some will come for you." "For me? Why?" "A white woman who chooses to live with Apache," he explained. "Who fights against her own kind's greed. This is powerful medicine. A story that travels fast." Before departing, he held her close, his massive frame enveloping her. 3 days, he promised. "Watch canyon entrance. Signal if company men come early." "Be careful," she whispered against his chest. "Always careful," he responded with a rare smile. "How else could I live so long?" As she watched his tall figure disappear into the dawn light, Sarah felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. Their odds remained desperately long, but something had shifted within her. A certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. She returned to their dwelling and unfolded the company letter once more, studying the official letterhead with its ornate engraving. This paper that meant to intimidate them might instead become their salvation. Proof of the company's intentions, evidence of corruption that even territorial officials might find troubling if properly presented. Sarah carefully stored the letter in her medicine pouch. A weapon of a different sort, but perhaps just as powerful as Nakohi's bow in the right circumstances. Alone in the canyon, Sarah worked with renewed purpose. She positioned small mirrors at strategic points to create a signaling system between defensive positions. She prepared medicine bundles for potential injuries and concealed them where they might be needed. Most importantly, she continued practicing with the bow Nakohi had crafted for her, each arrow finding its mark with increasing precision. On the second night of Nakohi's absence, she woke to a strange sensation in her body. A heaviness, a subtle change she recognized from her medical training. Placing a hand on her abdomen, she smiled into the darkness. Their bargain was bearing fruit sooner than expected. With morning came a new determination. This fight was no longer just about land or copper or even survival. It was about the future growing inside her, a future that merged two worlds in defiance of those who would keep them separate. By midday of the third day, there was still no sign of Nakohi. Sarah climbed to their lookout point and scanned the approaches to the canyon. No dust clouds rose from the direction of town, but neither was there any indication of Nakohi's return. As the sun began its westward descent, Sarah noticed movement in the brush near the canyon entrance, too deliberate for wildlife. She raised the spyglass, heart pounding, and caught glimpses of fabric through the foliage. Not the denim and flannel of miners, but the muted colors of buckskin and handwoven cloth. She hurried down to the canyon floor, bow slung across her back. Before she reached the entrance, figures emerged from concealment, 3 women, 2 older men, and 4 warriors, all Apache. They regarded her with wary curiosity as she approached. One of the women stepped forward, her weathered face dignified beneath silver-streaked hair. "You are the white woman who lives with Nakohi," she stated in heavily accented English. "I am," Sarah confirmed. "Where is he?" "Coming. With others." The woman studied Sarah's face. "I am Ishtun, Nakohi's father's sister." Sarah felt a jolt of surprise. Nakohi had never mentioned living family. "He didn't tell me he had an aunt." Ishtun's expression softened slightly. "He did not know I lived. I escaped San Carlos 3 winters ago." The group followed Sarah to the dwelling, where she offered what hospitality she could. As they ate, more arrived. A Mexican family with 3 sons of fighting age, 2 grizzled prospectors with rifles strapped to their saddles, a mixed-blood scout who introduced himself only as Joaquin. By nightfall, 17 people had gathered in the canyon, a small force, but composed of those who understood survival against long odds. Sarah learned that Nakohi had traveled tirelessly, calling in debts and making promises, convincing each that this stand was worth making. When Nakohi finally returned, leading a packhorse loaded with supplies, the greeting between him and Ishtun was subdued but powerful. A simple touching of foreheads that spoke of shared loss and unexpected reunion. Later, as the expanded group sat around multiple fires, Nakohi and Sarah moved among them, coordinating, planning, building a cohesive unit from disparate parts. Sarah noted how naturally he assumed leadership, his quiet authority drawing respect even from those who might typically shun Apache direction. As night deepened, Ishtun approached Sarah with a bundle in her arms. "For you," she said, unfolding a woven blanket of extraordinary beauty, geometric patterns in natural dyes of ochre, indigo, and white. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, running her fingers over the tight weave. "But I can't accept something so valuable." "Not just beautiful," Ishtun corrected. "Strong, like marriage basket but for fighting. Old pattern for protection." She pressed the blanket into Sarah's hands. "Apache woman makes this for important times. Birth, marriage, war." The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Sarah. This was acceptance, however provisional, from Nakohi's only family. "Nakohi tells me you carry a child," Ishtun added, her dark eyes assessing. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her abdomen. "How did he know?" "I only just realized myself." A rare smile crossed the older woman's face. "He knows woman's rhythms. He had Apache wife before many years ago." The revelation stunned Sarah. Nakohi had never mentioned a previous marriage. "What happened to her?" "Soldiers happened," Ishtun said simply. "Same raid that took his children." Children. The word echoed in Sarah's mind. Nakohi had been a father before, had watched his family destroyed by the same forces that now threatened them again. When she found him later, standing sentinel at the canyon entrance, Sarah approached. Quietly, without speaking, she unfolded the blanket Ishtun had given her and wrapped it around them both, its generous size enveloping their figures in a shared warmth. "You knew," she said softly, "about the baby." Nakohi nodded, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "I felt the change in you." "Ishtun told me about your family," Sarah continued carefully. "Your wife, your children." His body tensed, then gradually relaxed. "Long ago," he finally said. "Another life." They stood in silence, the weight of past losses and future possibilities suspended between them. "I should have told you," he added. "Yes," she agreed, "but I understand why you didn't." Beneath the blanket that joined them, his hand moved to rest protectively over her abdomen. "This child will know peace," he vowed. "Not war, not running." The promise hung in the night air, impossible to guarantee yet essential to believe. Together they watched the stars whirl overhead, 2 lives entwined against all probability, creating something new from the fragments of what had been taken from them both. Dawn revealed the canyon transformed, a defensive position rather than merely a dwelling place. The new arrivals had worked through the night, creating barriers at strategic points, establishing communication signals, preparing for the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. "We need supplies," Sarah told Nakohi as they shared a morning meal. "Medicine, ammunition, information about Fletcher's movements. Too dangerous for you in town," he replied. "They watch for you now. Not if they don't recognize me." Sarah gestured toward Ishtun, who was grinding corn nearby. "With her help, I could pass as Mexican or mixed blood." Nakohi studied her thoughtfully. With her skin darkened by weeks in the desert sun and her hair arranged differently, she might indeed avoid immediate recognition. Still, he hesitated. "I'll take Joaquin," she pressed. "He knows the town. We'll be careful." Finally, Nakohi nodded. "Be back before sunset. If not," his expression conveyed what words couldn't, that he would come for her, regardless of risk. An hour later, Sarah departed with Joaquin, dressed in a simple skirt and blouse borrowed from one of the Mexican women. Her hair was tightly braided and covered with a shawl. Her skin darkened further with walnut juice. Joaquin led her into town by a circuitous route that avoided the main road. Winchester was little more than a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, and the sheriff's office dominating the sparse landscape. "You wait here," Joaquin instructed, positioning Sarah in the shade beside the general store. "I listen first, make sure safe." While he disappeared around the corner, Sarah observed the town's activity. Miners from the Pinolino Company were evident by their dust-covered clothes and the company logo on their supply wagons. They moved with the confidence of men backed by powerful interests. The store's door opened, and Sarah tensed as a woman emerged, older, dressed in respectable but worn clothing, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. Their eyes met briefly before the woman continued down the street, carrying a small package. Joaquin returned moments later. "Sheriff's men all over town," he reported. "Looking for Apache. For you too. They say reward now." "Then we need to be quick," Sarah decided. "Let's get what we can and leave." Inside the general store, they selected essential supplies with careful attention to avoid attracting notice. As Sarah examined ammunition that would fit Nakohi's rifle, she felt a presence beside her. "You're her, aren't you?" whispered a female voice. Sarah turned to find the gray-haired woman from earlier, standing uncomfortably close. Fear spiked through her, but the woman's next words froze her in place. "The woman they say was taken by the Apache. Only you weren't taken at all, were you?" Sarah remained silent, her hand instinctively moving toward the knife concealed in her skirt. "Don't worry," the woman continued, her voice barely audible. "My name's Margaret Ellison. My husband and I ran this store until the mining company drove him to an early grave last year." She pressed a folded paper into Sarah's hand. "This came for you, care of your old homestead address. I've kept it, thinking you might still be alive somewhere." Sarah glanced down at the letter, postmarked from Boston, her sister's handwriting unmistakable on the envelope. "Why would you help me?" Sarah asked, suspicion warring with hope. "Because I've seen what Fletcher and his kind do to anyone in their way," Margaret answered simply. "My herald tried fighting them legally with deeds and lawyers. He died of a heart attack the day after winning a court judgment against the company." The bitterness in her voice rang with authentic grief. Sarah made a swift decision. "We need medicine," she whispered, "and information." Margaret nodded almost imperceptibly. "Meet me behind the church in 20 minutes. Bring your friend." When they rendezvoused later, Margaret had assembled a surprising collection of supplies. Bandages, laudanum, even precious quinine. More valuable was the information she provided. "Fletcher's bringing in 30 men tomorrow. The company's calling it a security detail for their surveyors, but they're armed like an army." She handed Sarah a small velvet pouch. "Take this too. It was my mother's." Inside was a silver brooch, intricate Celtic knotwork surrounding a polished turquoise stone. "I can't accept this," Sarah protested. "It's not just a gift," Margaret explained. "It's identification. There are others in town who've suffered under Fletcher's expansion. If they see this, they'll know you're an ally." Others? Joaquin asked, speaking for the first time. The blacksmith, the preacher, even one of the saloon girls whose brother was killed in a suspicious mine collapse. Margaret's eyes held steady determination. We can't fight directly, but we can help those who do. As they prepared to leave, Margaret pressed one final item into Sarah's hands. A copied page of company letterhead with signatures. Fletcher's been forging the governor's approval on these claims, she explained. The territorial administrator confirmed it when he passed through last month. But the sheriff's been paid to look the other way. Sarah carefully tucked the evidence into her bodice. This could change everything, she breathed. Be careful, Margaret warned. Fletcher's desperate. The company's investors are arriving next week to see the new claim. If he hasn't secured that canyon by then, he won't, Sarah promised. As they slipped out of town, Sarah felt a curious lightening of spirit despite the dangerous knowledge they carried. They were not alone in this fight. Beyond the canyon, unlikely allies awaited, people who had also lost to the inexorable march of greed disguised as progress. Nakohi listened intently to their report that evening. The tribal council gathered around the fire as Sarah displayed the evidence of Fletcher's forgery. So we fight not just for canyon, he observed, but for law itself. Yes, Sarah agreed, the silver brooch now pinned to the woven blanket draped across her shoulders. And we're not as outnumbered as we thought. That night, after strategies had been discussed and watches set, Sarah found Nakohi sitting alone at the edge of their camp. The moon cast long shadows across the canyon, silvering the landscape into an otherworldly terrain. She settled beside him, their shoulders just touching. You're troubled, she observed. He was silent for a long moment. Tomorrow brings blood, he finally said. Always it comes to this. Sarah understood his weariness. For a man who had spent decades fighting, first openly as a warrior, then in the shadows as a survivor, tomorrow represented not a new battle, but the continuation of an endless war. Tell me about your scar, she said softly, gesturing to the distinctive mark on his upper arm. A curved, jagged line that stood out from other battle wounds. Nakohi's hand moved instinctively to cover it. Old story. Not important now. Everything that shaped you is important to me, Sarah countered gently. Something in her tone reached him. With deliberate movements, he removed his shirt, revealing the full extent of the scar, an irregular crescent that wrapped from his bicep around to his shoulder blade. Comanche lance, he explained, his deep voice rumbling in the night quiet. I was 16. First big raid. Sarah traced the scar's outline with careful fingers. You were very young to face Comanche warriors. Was different time, before white soldiers came in numbers. Apache, Comanche, Navajo, all fighting for hunting grounds. His eyes grew distant with memory. I killed 2 men that day, earned my name Nakohi. And this was your greatest battle? Sarah prompted, sensing there was more. No. His voice lowered further. Greatest battle came later, against blue coats. Slowly, with measured words, Nakohi revealed what Sarah had only glimpsed through Ishtan's brief explanation. The story of his wife, Nazcha, and their 2 children. How they had survived the early reservation days together. How a cavalry patrol had attacked a hunting party that had strayed beyond permitted boundaries. How he had returned to find his family gone. His wife dead. His children taken to distant eastern schools under the new government policies. I went crazy time, he admitted. Killed many soldiers. Joined with Geronimo for 2 seasons. Became ghost. Striking, vanishing. Sarah listened without interruption, her hand steady on his arm. When he fell silent, she asked, And your children? Never found, he answered, the words heavy with decades of grief. Government schools take Apache name, give Christian name, cut hair, forbid language. Children disappear this way. Still alive but gone forever. The weight of his loss hung in the air between them. Sarah thought of the child growing inside her, part Apache, part white, and the complex world it would enter. Now I understand better why you accepted my bargain, she said. Not just for protection or companionship. For chance to be father again, he acknowledged. To pass on what would otherwise die with me. Sarah rested her head against his shoulder. And now? Is it still just about passing on knowledge? Nakohi turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. No longer just bargain, he said, his massive hand gentle against her cheek. You are mi vida, my life. The simple declaration moved Sarah deeply. In the short span of their relationship, they had traveled an enormous distance. From strangers making a pragmatic arrangement to partners bound by something far more profound. There's something I need to tell you too, she said, drawing a deep breath. Something about my husband. It was her turn for difficult revelations. She told him how Thomas had come west not just as a geologist but as part of a government survey, assessing mineral resources on lands being considered for tribal relocations. How his reports had sometimes been used to justify moving indigenous peoples from resource-rich areas. How his death had come not just from defending their claim but from his attempt to expose corruption in the Territorial Land Office. He tried to change his path at the end, she finished, to make right what he had been part of. That's why they killed him. She expected anger or at least withdrawal from Nakohi. Instead, he listened with the same steady presence she had offered him. We all walk between darkness and light, he said when she had finished. Your Thomas found his better path before the end. That is rare gift. His acceptance of her complicated truth, the fact that she had loved a man who had, however indirectly, contributed to the suffering of his people, felt like absolution. Neither of them was simple. Neither's past was unblemished. Yet here they were, creating something new from the broken pieces of their former lives. As night deepened around them, they sat together in comfortable silence, the shared weight of their histories no longer a barrier but a foundation. Tomorrow would bring danger and perhaps death. But tonight had brought a deeper understanding, a recognition that their bargain had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. Whatever comes, Sarah said, breaking the silence. I'm grateful for this time with you. Nakohi nodded, words unnecessary between them now. He drew her close under the woven blanket that had become a symbol of their union, two worlds coming together in defiance of those who would keep them forever separate. Morning arrived with a tension that hung over the canyon like storm clouds. Their scouts reported movement on the horizon, dust plumes signaling the approach of Fletcher's men, still distant but advancing steadily. Sarah supervised final preparations at their medical station, arranging supplies Margaret had provided. Nearby, Nakohi conducted a blessing ceremony with the Apache warriors, their voices raised in a song that echoed through the canyon walls. The first sign that something was wrong came from Joaquin, who had been monitoring the approaching force through the spyglass. Soldiers, he reported, face grim. Blue coats with the mining men. Sarah felt her stomach clench. That's impossible. The army wouldn't involve itself in a private mining dispute. But when she took the spyglass herself, the evidence was undeniable. Cavalry uniforms interspersed among Fletcher's hired men, the distinctive blue standing out against the desert landscape. How many? Nakohi asked. A half-dozen, Sarah answered, adjusting the focus. Led by an officer. They're riding alongside Fletcher, not behind. This is an official escort. The implications were serious. What had been a conflict with a mining company had suddenly become a confrontation with the United States Army, a fight they could not possibly win. We must talk to them, Sarah decided, before blood is shed. If the army believes I've been abducted, we need to correct that misunderstanding. Nakohi's expression darkened. Army does not listen to Apache. Never has. But they might listen to me, Sarah insisted. I'm the one they supposedly came to rescue. After heated debate among their small council, a compromise was reached. Sarah would approach under a flag of truce, but only to a neutral point between territories, with warriors concealed nearby as protection. As the company drew within a mile of the canyon, Sarah walked out alone, a white cloth tied to a branch held high above her head. She had abandoned her frontier clothing for a proper dress Margaret had provided, her hair arranged in a neat bun beneath a modest bonnet, the image of a respectable white woman, not a willing companion to an Apache warrior. The approaching party halted at her appearance. Through her spyglass, she had seen the officer raise his hand, commanding the others to stay back while he rode forward alone to meet her. As he drew closer, Sarah felt a cold shock of recognition. The lean figure, the precisely trimmed mustache, the rigid military bearing. She knew this man. Captain James Elliott had been her husband's closest friend in Boston, a military officer who had encouraged Thomas's participation in the territorial surveys. He had dined at their table countless times, had even escorted Sarah to cultural events when Thomas was working late. His presence here now was beyond coincidental. "Mrs. Caldwell," he called as he drew his horse to a halt several yards away. "Thank God you're alive." "Captain Elliott," she acknowledged, struggling to keep her voice steady. "This is unexpected. We've been searching for you since the attack on your homestead," he explained, dismounting but keeping his distance. "When we received intelligence you'd been taken by a renegade Apache, I personally volunteered to lead the rescue party." His concern seemed genuine, but Sarah knew better than to trust appearances. "How fortunate that your rescue coincides so precisely with the Pinolino Company's interest in this canyon." A flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps, crossed his face. "The territorial governor has approved their claim, Sarah. This land has been legally designated for development." "With forged documents," Sarah countered. "I have evidence of Fletcher's corruption, James. Evidence I intend to present to the territorial administrator." Elliott removed his hat, running a hand through hair now thinner than she remembered. "Sarah, please. This doesn't need to become complicated. Just come with me now. We can discuss all this once you're safe." "I am safe," she stated firmly. "I wasn't abducted. I sought refuge with Nakohe voluntarily after Fletcher's men burned me out." Elliott's expression hardened. "Nakohe? You're on a first-name basis with this savage." The slur ignited Sarah's anger. "He's more civilized than the men who murdered my husband." "Murdered?" Elliott's surprise seemed genuine. "Thomas died in a claim dispute, an unfortunate casualty of frontier justice." Sarah withdrew the letter Margaret had given her, the one from her sister in Boston. "My sister works as a secretary for the university regents. She found correspondence proving Thomas was killed because he discovered something in his geological surveys. Something about mineral rights being systematically stolen from legally designated tribal lands." She watched Elliott's face carefully as she continued. "The same correspondence mentioned a military liaison who helped identify which tribal lands contained valuable resources. A Captain J.E. The blood drained from Elliott's face. "Sarah, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," she cut him off. "You pointed the mining companies toward riches on Apache land. They paid you handsomely. And when Thomas threatened to expose the scheme, he became a liability." Elliott's hand moved subtly toward his sidearm. "These are dangerous accusations." "They're not accusations. They're facts I intend to present to a federal judge." Sarah held his gaze steadily. "Unless you turn your men around and leave this canyon now." From his breast pocket, Elliott withdrew a military badge, a cavalry insignia with his rank and unit designation. "Do you see this, Sarah? This represents the full authority of the United States government. Whatever grievances you think you have, whatever relationship you've formed with that Apache, none of it stands against this." He tossed the badge at her feet, a gesture of contempt that revealed how little he understood her transformation. "You have until sunset to surrender the Apache and vacate this land," he declared, remounting his horse. "After that, we come in with full force." As he rode back toward Fletcher's waiting men, Sarah bent to retrieve the badge, its weight solid and cold in her palm. This small piece of metal represented everything she had once respected: order, civilization, progress. Now it symbolized corruption and betrayal. When she returned to the canyon, Nakohe was waiting, his expression unreadable. "The officer," he said, not a question. "You know him?" "Yes," Sarah admitted. "He was my husband's friend, and likely the man who ordered his death." Nakohe's eyes narrowed. "This changes our fight." "It changes everything," Sarah agreed, showing him the badge. He gave us until sunset. After that, they attack with army backing. The revelation spread quickly through their small band of defenders. The Apache families began preparing to leave, the prospectors argued for surrender, and even Joaquin counseled retreat. Only Ishtun remained unmoved, her weathered face calm as she tended the fire. "This is old story," she told Sarah. "They want land, they bring soldiers. Always same ending." "Not always," Sarah replied, her hand moving protectively over her abdomen. "Not this time." By mid-afternoon, half their allies had departed, slipping away in small groups, seeking safety before the promised attack. Sarah couldn't blame them. Facing Fletcher's hired guns was one thing. Confronting the United States cavalry was suicide, especially for Apache families already hunted by the government. Nakohe had withdrawn to the highest point of the canyon, a solitary figure silhouetted against the sky. He had spoken little since learning of Sarah's connection to Captain Elliot, his silence more troubling than anger would have been. When Sarah finally climbed up to join him, she found him fashioning arrow points with methodical precision, his massive hands surprisingly delicate in their movements. "Most have gone," she said, settling beside him on the sun-warmed stone. "Yes." His response was flat, emotionless. "Nakohe, we need to talk about Elliot." "Nothing to talk about." The flint cracked sharply as he applied pressure. "White officer, your husband's friend. Now enemy. Simple." "It's not simple." Sarah placed her hand over his, stilling his work. "I need you to understand. I had no idea of his involvement in Thomas's death, or in the land schemes. He was like family to us." Nakohe finally met her eyes, his gaze penetrating. "Did you love him too?" The question caught her off guard. "No, never. He was Thomas's friend, that's all." "He loves you," Nakohe stated with certainty. "I saw it in how he looked at you, how he spoke your name." Sarah considered this, recalling subtle signs she might have missed or dismissed during her married years in Boston. Perhaps he did, but that's not relevant now. "It is relevant," Nakohe countered, his voice gaining intensity. "Man like that, military man with pride, he will not accept you choosing Apache over him. He will burn Canyon and everyone in it rather than see you with me." The truth of his assessment struck Sarah with chilling clarity. Elliot's ultimatum wasn't just about mining rights or even military authority. It was personal, driven by jealousy as much as duty. "Then we need to leave," she concluded. "All of us. Now, before sunset." "And go where?" Nakohe gestured toward the vast landscape beyond the canyon. "There is no place they will not follow." "We could reach Mexico," Sarah suggested. "Cross the border where they can't pursue us legally." Nakohe gave a bitter laugh. "You still believe in white man's laws? After everything?" His words stung, but Sarah recognized the deeper pain beneath them, the betrayal he felt, not just by Elliot or the army, but perhaps by her. The revelation of her connection to those who had systematically destroyed his people had reopened wounds she hadn't fully appreciated. From her pocket, Sarah withdrew the eagle feather Ishtun had given her days earlier, a symbol of honor among the Apache. She had been saving it for a special occasion, but now seemed the moment it was most needed. "I believe in some laws," she said, holding out the feather. "Natural laws. The law that says a promise made must be kept. The law that says we protect what we love." Nakohe stared at the feather, understanding its significance. Among his people, such a gift was not given lightly, especially by a white woman. "Where did you get this?" "Ishtun gave it to me," Sarah explained. "For our child. For the future." She placed the feather in his palm and closed his fingers around it. "I made you a bargain, Nakohe. Sons for safety. But what's between us now goes beyond any bargain." She placed her hand over her abdomen. "This child will carry both our bloods, both our stories. I won't let Elliot or anyone else take that future from us." Something shifted in Nakohe's expression, the hardness giving way to a vulnerability rarely glimpsed. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, emotions warring within him. If you want me to go, I will, she said quietly. Take the child somewhere safe, away from all this. But I would rather stand with you, here or wherever we choose together. Nakohi was silent for a long moment, the eagle feather held carefully in his massive palm. Then he reached for her, drawing her into an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words of his decision. We stay, he said finally, not to fight hopeless battle, but to choose our own path. He touched the feather to her heart, then to his own. Together, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they made their way back down to the canyon floor where their remaining allies waited. The Mexican family, Joaquin, Ishtan, and 2 of the younger Apache warriors had stayed. A small band, but loyal. We have plan, Nakohi announced, his natural authority drawing them into a tight circle. The strategy he outlined was bold and unexpected. Not the desperate last stand everyone had anticipated, but something far more cunning. They would use the approaching darkness, their knowledge of the terrain, and most importantly, the evidence Sarah possessed about Elliot and Fletcher's corruption. Not battle, Nakohi explained. Hunt, like coyote hunts rattlesnake, carefully, with purpose. As they dispersed to prepare, Sarah felt a curious lightness despite the danger ahead. The confrontation with Elliot had forced a reckoning between her and Nakohi, one that had deepened rather than damaged their bond. Whatever the night might bring, they would face it as true partners, their original bargain transformed into something far more sacred. A shared future worth any risk to defend. Dusk approached with deliberate slowness, the sun lingering on the horizon as if reluctant to abandon them tonight. In the canyon's shadows, Nakohi and his remaining allies made final preparations. Their plan relied not on overwhelming force, which they lacked, but on intimate knowledge of the terrain and the darkness that would soon be their ally. Sarah worked alongside Joaquin, creating a hand-drawn map that detailed every hidden path, every concealed recess within the canyon's complex geography. Unlike the surveyor's technical drawing, this map marked routes known only to those who had lived within these stone walls. Passages too narrow for horses, ledges invisible unless you knew precisely where to look, springs that emerged from seemingly solid rock. Here, she indicated, marking a particular pathway with charcoal. This leads behind the main cave and comes out above the north rim. From there, you can see the entire canyon entrance without being spotted. Joaquin nodded, committing the route to memory. And the signal? I'll call 3 times, Sarah confirmed. Then wait for Nakohi's response before moving. Similar instructions were being shared with each member of their small band, transforming them from desperate defenders into a coordinated unit. The Mexican father and his sons would create diversions at strategic points. Ishtan would maintain their base camp, prepared to treat injuries or assist in a rapid evacuation if necessary. The young Apache warriors would shadow Nakohi, moving as his extensions through the darkness. As sunset painted the canyon walls in fiery hues, Sarah sought out Nakohi for a final consultation. She found him preparing his weapons with ceremonial care, checking his rifle, selecting arrows, sharpening his hunting knife. The rituals of a warrior preparing for battle had changed little across centuries, she realized. Everything is ready, she reported, unfolding their hand-drawn map one last time. Each person knows their position and signals. Nakohi studied the map, then carefully folded it and handed it back to her. Keep this close, he instructed. If we become separated, it may save your life. The unspoken possibility hung between them, that not everyone would survive the night ahead. Sarah tucked the map securely into her bodice, alongside the evidence against Elliot and Fletcher. These papers had become their most powerful weapons, potentially more effective than bullets against the forces aligned against them. Elliot won't expect our approach, she said, thinking aloud. He believes we're trapped here, waiting for his assault. Yes, Nakohi agreed. Surprise is our strength. That and his weakness. His weakness. You, Nakohi said simply. He will not want to harm you. This stays his hand where others are concerned. Sarah understood the tactical advantage her presence created, though the thought of using Elliot's feelings, however unwelcome they might be, left her uncomfortable. Still, survival demanded using every available resource. From the canyon entrance came a soft, distinctive whistle, their sentry signaling the approach of riders. Darkness had fallen completely now, the canyon illuminated only by starlight and their carefully banked fires. "They come earlier than promised," Nakohi observed, his expression grim but unsurprised. White officers rarely keep word given to Apache. Sarah checked her own preparations, the knife secured at her waist, the small pistol Joaquin had provided tucked into a hidden pocket, her hair bound tightly back for movement without hindrance. She had abandoned her dress for practical clothing that would allow her to navigate the difficult terrain ahead. Trousers beneath a split skirt, a dark shirt that wouldn't catch moonlight. "Remember," Nakohi said, his voice low and intense as he clasped her shoulders. "No unnecessary risks. Our child needs its mother." "And its father," Sarah countered, reaching up to touch his face. "We both return, or neither does." The sentiment was impractical, perhaps, but it expressed a truth they both felt. Their fates had become inseparable, their futures bound as tightly as their hearts. Around them, their small band gathered for final instructions. Despite the overwhelming odds, Sarah noted a curious calm among them. Not the resignation of the doomed, but the focused determination of those fighting for something beyond themselves. "We move in pairs," Nakohi explained, his natural leadership evident in how the others attended his words. "Always one watches while one moves. No firing unless directly threatened. Silence is our protection." He assigned positions with careful consideration of each person's strengths. The youngest Apache warrior, fleet-footed and keen-eyed, would serve as their scout. Joaquin, with his knowledge of the soldiers' tactics, would position himself to observe their movements. The Mexican family would guard their escape route, ensuring a path remained open if retreat became necessary. "And Sarah?" Ishtun asked, her weathered face impossible to read in the darkness. "With me," Nakohi answered without hesitation. "We approach Elliot together." It was a decision that surprised some. Bringing a pregnant woman into the most dangerous position seemed counterintuitive. But all understood the strategy. Sarah's presence would complicate Elliot's responses, forcing him to confront the human reality of what he pursued. As they prepared to disperse, Ishtun approached Sarah with a small bundle wrapped in buckskin. "Medicine," she explained, pressing it into Sarah's hands. "For courage. For protection." Sarah accepted the gift with appropriate gravity. "Thank you, Ishtun, for everything." The older woman nodded once, then did something unexpected. She embraced Sarah briefly, the gesture communicating what words could not. Acceptance, respect, solidarity between women who understood survival's cost. When the group separated, moving like shadows toward their assigned positions, Sarah felt a curious sense of clarity. Whether the night ended in victory or defeat, she was exactly where she belonged. Alongside the man who had begun as her protector and become her partner, facing whatever came with clear eyes and an undivided heart. Night wrapped the canyon in concealing darkness, the moon's sliver providing just enough light to navigate without betraying their movements. Sarah followed Nakohi along a narrow ridge, their footsteps silent on the stone path. Below, the canyon entrance flickered with approaching torches, Fletcher's men establishing their position. Through Joaquin's spyglass, Sarah counted nearly 30 figures moving in disciplined formation. The cavalry soldiers were easily distinguishable by their straight backs and coordinated movements, contrasting with the looser arrangement of Fletcher's hired guns. "They've split into 3 groups," she whispered to Nakohi. "Main force at the entrance, smaller units circling to the north and south rims. Trying to surround us," he confirmed. "But they do not know all paths." From their elevated position, they watched Captain Elliot direct his men with precise hand signals. Fletcher stood nearby, his bulk unmistakable even in darkness, gesturing impatiently toward the canyon's interior. The 2 men appeared to be disagreeing about strategy, Elliot favoring a cautious approach while Fletcher urged immediate action. The dispute confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Despite the united front they presented, tensions existed between military discipline and corporate greed. A sound like stone striking stone echoed from the southern ridge, the signal from one of the Apache warriors that Fletcher's men had reached the false trail laid for them. Moments later, shouts erupted as the hired guns discovered the carefully arranged warning signs. Apache symbols painted on rocks, creating the impression of a much larger defending force. Now, Nakohi breathed, touching Sarah's arm. They descended swiftly through a nearly invisible crevice, emerging behind a massive boulder that concealed them from the main force while providing a clear view of Elliot's command position. Here, they would execute the first phase of their plan, separating the captain from Fletcher before the main assault could begin. Sarah withdrew the letter from her sister and the evidence of forged documents. Ready? Nakohi nodded, melting into deeper shadows as Sarah prepared for her role. They had agreed that she would approach alone, a calculated risk that relied on Elliot's personal feelings and his military honor. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped into a shaft of moonlight and called out clearly, "Captain Elliot, I wish to speak with you under flag of truce." The effect was immediate. Rifles swung in her direction, torches illuminated her position, and Fletcher's voice rose in triumphant recognition. "There she is. I told you they were still here." But it was Elliot who controlled the response, his authoritative command freezing his men in place. "Hold your fire. That's an order." He stepped forward, separated from his troops. "Mrs. Caldwell? Are you alone?" "I am," Sarah answered, the careful lie necessary for their strategy. "And I have information you need to see before this goes any further." Fletcher pushed forward. "This is a trick. The Apache's using her as bait." Elliot hesitated, torn between military caution and personal concern. "What information?" "Evidence of the forged documents Fletcher has been using," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "And proof of who really killed my husband." The accusation created precisely the distraction they had anticipated. As Elliot and Fletcher argued, attention shifted away from Sarah's position. Behind the line of soldiers, Joaquin and the younger Apache warrior moved silently into position, targeting the pack animals carrying supplies and ammunition. "Enough of this," Fletcher snarled, his patience exhausted. "We're taking this canyon tonight, with or without your Apache prisoner." He turned to his hired men. $500 to the man who brings me the giant's head." Before Elliot could countermand the order, Fletcher's men surged forward, torches and rifles advancing toward the canyon interior. The cavalry soldiers, caught between conflicting authorities, hesitated momentarily, the critical delay Nakohi had counted on. From the shadows behind Sarah, his first arrow flew with deadly accuracy, striking a torch from a mercenary's hand. A second arrow followed instantly, pinning another man's sleeve to a wooden pack saddle. Not killing shots, warnings designed to create confusion rather than casualties. The effect was instantaneous. Fletcher's men fired wildly into the darkness, their shots echoing thunderously between canyon walls, creating the impression of a much larger opposing force. Simultaneously, Joaquin and his Confederates spooked the pack mules, sending supplies crashing across the narrow path and further disrupting the attacking line. In the chaos, Nakohi appeared beside Sarah with ghost-like suddenness. "Now we move," he murmured. "While they fight shadows." They retreated swiftly up their hidden path, but not before Sarah caught Elliot's eye across the churning battlefield. The captain stood frozen, recognition dawning as he saw Nakohi's towering figure beside her. Not as captor but as protector, his hand clasped firmly in hers as they disappeared into the night. The skirmish below intensified, but with a crucial development Nakohi had anticipated. The cavalry soldiers, disciplined despite the confusion, were now restraining Fletcher's more impulsive mercenaries. Military order was asserting itself over Fletcher's chaotic assault, exactly as they had hoped. From their new vantage point higher on the canyon wall, Sarah and Nakohi watched the first confrontation unfold. The spent bullet casing that had narrowly missed Sarah lay between them on the stone ledge, a tangible reminder of how quickly life could end, how precious each moment had become. "First blood drawn," Nakohi observed grimly as they counted casualties below. 2 of Fletcher's men wounded, though none dead. "And Elliot saw us together," Sarah added. "He knows now that I'm here by choice." Nakohi nodded, understanding the significance. This changes his heart in fight, makes him question orders. As if confirming their assessment, they watched Elliot command his men to establish a defensive perimeter rather than continue the advance. Fletcher's objections were visible in his wild gesticulations, but military authority had temporarily prevailed. They will not attack again tonight, Nakohi concluded. Too much confusion, too many unknowns. Sarah picked up the spent bullet casing, rolling the still warm metal between her fingers. One night gained, she said softly. But tomorrow, Nakohi finished. We spring main trap. His expression held a grim satisfaction as he surveyed the disarray below. Tonight was just beginning. Dawn brought uneasy stillness to the canyon. Fletcher's forces had withdrawn to a defensible position at the entrance, establishing a makeshift camp from which to plan their next move. The cavalry soldiers maintained a separate perimeter, the distance between the two groups a visible manifestation of the growing rift in their alliance. Sarah and Nakohi had rejoined their small band at their hidden camp deeper within the canyon. The night's success had boosted morale, but all recognized it was merely a temporary advantage, a postponement rather than a victory. As they gathered around a carefully shielded fire, Sarah felt the first twinge, a sharp, unexpected pain that caused her to pause mid-sentence. She dismissed it as tension from the night's exertions, focusing instead on their strategy for the day ahead. Elliot will want to negotiate now, she explained to the group. He saw us together. He knows I'm not a captive. But Fletcher won't negotiate, Joaquin countered. He needs this land before his investors arrive next week. He'll push for another attack, with or without the soldiers. Nakohi nodded in agreement. Fletcher is wounded animal now. More dangerous. They were discussing options when the pain returned. Stronger this time, radiating across Sarah's abdomen in an unmistakable pattern. She inhaled sharply, one hand bracing against the stone wall for support. Ishtun noticed immediately, her weathered eyes narrowing as she observed Sarah's posture. The older woman approached quietly, placing a gnarled hand on Sarah's lower back. The child comes, she stated simply, not a question. Sarah shook her head in denial. It's too early. Just discomfort from... Another contraction interrupted her, this one impossible to conceal. Nakohi was at her side instantly, concern etched deeply in his face. How long? Since dawn, Sarah admitted reluctantly. But it can't be labor. The baby isn't due for weeks yet. Stress brings children early, Ishtun said matter-of-factly. War babies often rush to world. The implications settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Their already precarious situation had just become dramatically more complicated. Sarah's mobility, critical to their strategy, would be compromised. Their timeline for confronting Fletcher and Elliot had suddenly contracted. Nakohi made an immediate decision. Change of plans, he announced. We negotiate now before Sarah cannot move. Joaquin shook his head doubtfully. Fletcher won't talk. He wants blood. Not Fletcher, Nakohi clarified. Elliot, military man, understands life of mother, child, has honor even if misguided. The logic was sound. Captain Elliot, whatever his flaws, operated within a code that Fletcher did not recognize. A woman in labor, particularly one he had personal feelings for, would create a moral dilemma he could not easily dismiss. As they hastily revised their strategy, Sarah's contractions intensified. Ishtun guided her to a sheltered alcove and began unpacking her medicine bundle, herbs, clean cloths, a small knife with obsidian blade. The preparations for birth. Amid preparations for battle created a surreal juxtaposition that wasn't lost on anyone present. I can still do this, Sarah insisted, breathing through another contraction. The first stage of labor can last many hours. There's time. Nakohi knelt beside her, his massive hand engulfing hers. No risks, he said firmly. Child and mother come first. If we wait, we lose our advantage, Sarah argued. Fletcher will have reinforcements by tomorrow. This might be our only chance. The tactical assessment was accurate, if uncomfortable. Their moment of leverage, Elliot's uncertainty, the division between military and mercenary forces, was fleeting. By the following day, corporate interests would likely override military scruples. After intense discussion, they formulated a compromise. Nakohi would approach Elliot under flag of truce, offering negotiation. Meanwhile, Joaquin and the Apache warriors would maintain defensive positions, ready to extract Sarah along their escape route if negotiations failed. Before Nakohi departed, Ishtun presented Sarah with an object wrapped in soft buckskin, a complete medicine bundle for childbirth, containing herbs for pain and bleeding, ceremonial items for protection, and practical tools for delivery. Apache women birth strong children, even in hard times, she assured Sarah, demonstrating how to use each component. This medicine helped many mothers. Will help you too. The bundle represented Ishtun's acceptance of Sarah not just as Nakohi's partner, but as a mother worthy of tribal knowledge. A profound gift that transcended their differences. As another contraction gripped her, Sarah clutched the medicine bundle, drawing strength from its tangible connection to generations of women who had given birth under circumstances far more difficult than her own. Go, she told Nakohi, mastering her pain with determined effort. Do what must be done. I will be ready when you return. Nakohi hesitated, torn between his role as protector and his duty as leader. Ishtun stays with you, he decided, and youngest warrior as guard. Sarah nodded her agreement, then reached for his hand once more. Nakohi, she said softly, ensuring the others couldn't hear. If you must choose between the canyon and us. No choice to make, he interrupted firmly. Family is everything. Land can be found elsewhere. The simplicity of his priority moved her deeply. For a man who had lost one family to violence, the prospect of losing another was unthinkable, a line he would not cross regardless of strategic advantage. As Nakohi departed with Joaquin and the remaining warriors, Sarah settled into the rhythm of early labor, her mind working through contingencies even as her body prepared for birth. The medicine bundle rested beside her, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of female strength that transcended cultural boundaries. Tell me of Apache birth songs, she requested of Ishtun, seeking distraction from both pain and worry. What do mothers sing to give courage? As the older woman began a low, melodic chant, Sarah closed her eyes and surrendered to the ancient pattern of bringing life into the world. A process that continued regardless of human conflicts, a reminder that some forces were greater than the temporary struggles of men. Nakohi stood tall under the midday sun, a white cloth tied to his rifle as he approached the military encampment. Captain Elliot met him at the perimeter, his posture rigid with professional caution, but his eyes revealing curiosity about this legendary Apache who would become entwined with Sarah's fate. From his hidden observation point, Joaquin watched the exchange through the spyglass, ready to signal the others if negotiations failed. What he couldn't see, what none of them had anticipated, was Fletcher's independent movement on the far side of the canyon. While Nakohi engaged Elliot in formal discussion, Fletcher had gathered his most loyal men and circled behind the cavalry position, following tracks discovered during the night. 6 mercenaries, all experienced Indian fighters, moved silently through the brush toward the upper canyon where Sarah and Ishtun waited. Inside the sheltered alcove, Sarah's labor had progressed rapidly. Her contractions now came at regular intervals, her body preparing for the final stage of birth. Ishtun worked with quiet efficiency, positioning clean hides beneath Sarah, preparing herbal infusions for strength and pain relief. The young Apache warrior stood guard outside, alert but unaware of the approaching threat. Fletcher's men had employed every trick learned in years of frontier warfare, moving downwind, stepping only on stone to avoid leaving prints, maintaining complete silence even when rattlesnakes threatened their path. In the military camp, Nakohi presented Elliot with the evidence of Fletcher's corruption: the forged documents, Sarah's sister's letter, the territorial administrator's confirmation of irregularities. The captain studied each paper with growing discomfort. His loyalty to the system he served warring with his sense of justice. These are serious allegations, Elliot finally acknowledged. If true, they warrant investigation. They are true, Nakohi stated simply. But more important matter now. Sarah labors with child. The revelation struck Elliot like a physical blow. Child? She's pregnant. Yes, my child. Our child. Nakohi's direct gaze challenged the captain to deny the reality of their union. She needs doctor. Needs safety. Conflict played across Elliot's features. Jealousy, concern, duty all wrestling for supremacy. Where is she now? Before Nakohi could answer, gunfire erupted from the upper canyon. 3 quick shots followed by a cry cut suddenly short. The young guard had spotted Fletcher's men too late. Nakohi was running before the echoes faded. All pretense of negotiation abandoned. Behind him, Elliot shouted orders to his cavalry unit, though whether to assist or pursue remained unclear. Fletcher's men had reached the hidden camp, overwhelming the young guard with brutal efficiency. As they closed in on the alcove where Sarah labored, Ishtun emerged to confront them, an elderly woman standing defiantly before armed men. "No further," she commanded in broken English, wielding only a skinning knife against their rifles. Fletcher himself stepped forward, tobacco juice staining his unkempt beard. "Move aside, old woman. We've come for the white woman. She births child," Ishtun replied, unflinching. "You not disturb." Fletcher's laugh was cruel and dismissive. "Perfect. 2 for the price of 1. The half-breed brat will fetch a good bounty too." When Ishtun refused to yield, Fletcher's response was coldly pragmatic. A single shot that sent the elderly woman crumpling to the ground, her blood soaking into the canyon soil. Inside the alcove, Sarah heard the gunshot and Ishtun's cry. Despite her labor, she reached for the small pistol concealed among her belongings. When Fletcher's massive figure filled the entrance, he found himself staring into the unwavering barrel of her weapon. "Not one step closer," Sarah warned, her voice steady despite the contraction gripping her body. Fletcher assessed the situation with calculating eyes. "You're in no condition to stop us, Mrs. Caldwell. That baby's coming whether you like it or not. Might as well be in comfortable army custody." "This baby will be born free," Sarah countered. "Not as a spectacle or a prisoner." Fletcher's patience evaporated. With a nod to his men, he prepared to rush her position. A pregnant woman would be no match for 6 hardened fighters, gun or no gun. The attack never came. From the ridge above, Nakohi descended like avenging fury, his war cry freezing the mercenaries in momentary shock. Unlike the previous night's warning shots, his arrows now flew with lethal intent, the first taking Fletcher's lieutenant through the throat, the second piercing the shoulder of another hired gun. The remaining mercenaries scattered for cover, firing wildly as Nakohi landed among them with the full force of his massive frame. The confined space of the canyon ledge neutralized their numerical advantage, forcing them into individual combat against an opponent of legendary strength and skill. Fletcher alone held his ground, raising his rifle toward Nakohi with murderous determination. "I'm going to mount your head on my office wall, savage," he snarled. The shot that rang out came not from Fletcher's rifle but from behind him. Sarah's small pistol, fired with desperate accuracy. The bullet struck Fletcher's arm, spoiling his aim and sending his shot harmlessly into the canyon wall. Before he could recover, Nakohi was upon him. Their struggle was brief but brutal, ending with Fletcher dangling over the canyon edge, his life literally in the Apache's massive hands. "Kill me and be done with it," Fletcher spat, blood from his wounded arm dripping into the abyss below. Nakohi's face remained impassive as he replied, "Death too easy. You will face white man's justice instead." With that, he pulled Fletcher back from the edge and bound him securely, just as Captain Elliot arrived with his cavalry unit. The scene that greeted the soldiers defied their expectations. Fletcher and his men subdued, while Nakohi knelt beside a wounded Ishtun, tending her injury with gentle hands. From the alcove came a new sound, Sarah's cry, not of fear or pain but the distinctive effort of final stage labor. The child was coming, ready or not, amid the aftermath of violence. Elliot surveyed the battlefield, his military training assessing what had occurred in his absence. His gaze fell on Fletcher's hat, which had fallen during the struggle, a fine Stetson with the company logo prominently displayed. now stained with its owner's blood. The captain picked it up, turning it in his hands as he made the decision that would define his honor. The birth of twins, two robust boys with their father's dark eyes and their mother's determined chin, occurred amid the unlikely gathering of Apache warriors, cavalry soldiers, and the surviving members of their small alliance. Captain Elliot himself dispatched a rider to the nearest settlement for a doctor, though by the time medical help arrived, Sarah had already delivered her sons under Ishton's guidance, the elderly woman directing proceedings from her own pallet where she recovered from Fletcher's bullet. 2 sons? Nakohi whispered in wonder, cradling the impossibly small infants in his massive hands. Double blessing. Sarah, exhausted but triumphant, watched her unlikely family with quiet joy. They need names, she murmured. First son takes father's father name, Homothea, means walks in wisdom, Nakohi declared, touching the eldest twin's forehead. Second son takes mother's father name. James, Sarah supplied. After my father. Homothea and James, Nakohi repeated, binding both traditions in a single breath. Strong names for strong sons. The days that followed brought unexpected developments. Rather than arresting Nakohi or attempting to remove Sarah, Captain Elliot established a protective perimeter around the canyon while dispatching messengers to territorial authorities. Fletcher and his surviving men were kept under guard, their futures uncertain pending investigation of Sarah's evidence. On the 4th day, dust clouds on the horizon announced the arrival of territorial officials. Not just local representatives, but a delegation from the governor's office itself, accompanied by a federal Indian Affairs agent. Sarah, still recovering from childbirth, received them in the main cave, the twins sleeping peacefully nearby while Nakohi stood protectively at her side. The territorial administrator, a thin man named Hollister with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, reviewed the documents with increasing distress. These forgeries are most concerning, he admitted, examining Fletcher's handiwork under a magnifying glass. And you say Captain Elliot can confirm your husband discovered similar irregularities before his death? Ask him yourself, Sarah suggested, nodding toward the entrance where Elliot waited. When summoned, the captain's testimony proved transformative. Whether motivated by lingering affection for Sarah, belated honor, or simple recognition that his career could not survive complicity in corruption, Elliot provided a comprehensive account of the land-grabbing scheme that had claimed Thomas Caldwell's life. Mrs. Caldwell's husband discovered that mining companies were systematically falsifying surveys, he explained, his posture military straight despite his evident discomfort, claiming Apache lands were abandoned when they were in fact traditionally used hunting grounds, bribing officials to look the other way. The Indian Affairs agent, a surprisingly sympathetic Quaker named Bennett, took detailed notes. This confirms patterns we've observed throughout the territory, he commented. But rarely have we seen such clear evidence. As the officials conferred, Sarah and Nakohi exchanged cautious glances. After so much conflict, this bureaucratic proceeding seemed almost anticlimactic, yet its outcome would determine their future more surely than any battle. Finally, Administrator Hollister cleared his throat. In light of these revelations and pending full investigation, I am authorized to issue a temporary stay on all mining activities in this canyon. He withdrew an official document from his case, applying his seal with careful precision. Furthermore, given the unusual circumstances, I am prepared to recommend a special dispensation regarding land rights. The document he presented was unprecedented, a land deed acknowledging both Sarah's homesteading rights as a widow and Nakohi's traditional claim as an indigenous occupant. The canyon and surrounding acres would be jointly held, outside both reservation boundaries and conventional property laws. This is highly irregular, Hollister admitted, adjusting his spectacles nervously. But these are irregular times. The territorial governor is eager to avoid scandal, particularly with Eastern investors watching our region closely. Bennett, the Indian Affairs agent, seemed pleased with the arrangement. We've been advocating for more flexible approaches to land rights, he noted. This could become a model for future accommodations. The reality behind their good fortune was more pragmatic than principled, as Sarah well understood. With Fletcher's corruption exposed and potential scandal threatening political careers, expediency favored resolution over further conflict. Their small canyon had suddenly become more valuable as a success story than as a mining claim. As the officials prepared to depart, Captain Elliot approached Sarah privately. "I've requested transfer to another territory," he informed her, his expression carefully neutral. "It seems best for all concerned." Sarah studied the man who had once been a friend, then an enemy, and now something indefinable between the two. "What will happen to Fletcher?" "He'll stand trial for fraud at minimum," Elliot replied. "Possibly for your husband's death as well, though that may be harder to prove." He hesitated, then added awkwardly, "Your children. They're fortunate to have parents willing to fight so determinately for their future." The acknowledgement, however difficult it might have been for him to offer, represented a final severance of old ties and perhaps the beginning of a fragile peace. When the delegation departed, taking Fletcher and his men to face territorial justice, an unexpected stillness settled over the canyon. For the first time since Sarah had arrived with her desperate bargain, there were no immediate threats, no need for vigilance or strategy. That evening, as twilight painted the canyon walls in deepening shades of amber and rose, Nakohi sat beside Sarah outside their dwelling. The twins slept nearby in a cradle fashioned from a sturdy willow basket, while Ishtun and the remaining members of their alliance prepared an evening meal. "Strange," Nakohi observed, surveying their domain with thoughtful eyes. "To win with papers what could not be won with weapons." "Not just papers," Sarah corrected, reaching for his hand. "Truth, justice, perhaps even a little compassion." Nakohi nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "White man's laws change like wind. Today they favor us. Tomorrow," he shrugged, the gesture encompassing centuries of broken promises. "Then we remain vigilant," Sarah acknowledged. "But tonight, we celebrate what we've earned." From his pocket, Nakohi withdrew the land deed, carefully unfolding its official pages with a reverence normally reserved for sacred objects. In many ways, it was indeed sacred, a tangible protection for their unconventional family, a barrier against those who would separate what they had joined together. "Our sons will grow here," he said, his voice softening as he glanced toward the sleeping infants. "Not running, not hiding, standing proud between two worlds." The document that officially recognized their claim to the canyon represented more than legal protection. It was acknowledgement of a future neither of them had dared imagine when Sarah first appeared with her desperate offer. A future where barriers might be bridged, where old enemies might find common ground, where love might flourish in the most unlikely soil. 5 years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of the twins, who ran through the canyon with the sure-footed confidence of young deer. Homothea, the firstborn by mere minutes, had inherited his father's height and quiet watchfulness. James, slightly smaller but more vocal, possessed his mother's curiosity and quick smile. Together they embodied the union of two worlds, equally at home with Apache traditions and the knowledge Sarah brought from her Eastern upbringing. The canyon itself had transformed. What had once been Nakohi's sparse dwelling now expanded into a proper homestead. A sturdy cabin of stone and timber stood near the original cave, which they maintained as a cool storage space and retreat during summer heat. Gardens flourished near the spring. Medicinal herbs, vegetables, even flowers that Sarah had insisted upon, because beauty matters as much as practicality. Most significant was the addition of others who had joined their unconventional community. 2 Apache families related to Ishtun had settled nearby, along with Joaquin and his Mexican cousins. Margaret Ellison, after selling her store following Fletcher's conviction, had brought her considerable organizational skills to what was becoming a trading post of modest but growing importance. On this particular autumn morning, Sarah sat on the porch nursing a cup of coffee as she watched Nakohi teaching the twins to carve. His massive hands enveloped their small ones, guiding their movements with infinite patience as they shaped pieces of soft pine. "Gentle," he instructed, his deep voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Wood speaks to you if you listen, tells you what it wants to become." Nearby stood his latest creation, a family cradle carved from a lightning-struck juniper. Unlike the simple willow basket that had served the twins in their infancy, this was a work of art, with intricate designs telling the story of their unusual family. Apache symbols of protection flowed into botanical motifs from Sarah's medical books, the two traditions merging into something entirely new. "Uncle Joaquin's coming," James announced, his sharp eyes spotting the rider approaching from the South Trail. Joaquin had expanded his role from scout to trader, making regular trips between their canyon and the growing settlement that had replaced Winchester after the mining boom collapsed. He brought supplies, mail, and, most importantly, news of the world beyond their peaceful enclave. "Mrs. Nakohe," he greeted Sarah with a tip of his hat, using the name she had adopted in their community, though she maintained Caldwell for legal purposes. "Letters from Boston for you, and newspaper with interesting story." The newspaper proved most intriguing, a territorial gazette with a front-page article about their canyon. "Successful experiment in territorial relations," proclaimed the headline above a surprisingly accurate account of their community. "The mixed settlement at Apache Canyon demonstrates a viable alternative to the reservation system," the article stated. With indigenous and settler families cooperating in a self-governing community, territorial officials are considering similar arrangements in select locations. Nakohe read the piece over Sarah's shoulder, his expression bemused. "They make us sound like government idea," he observed dryly. "Not something we fought and bled for." "That's politics," Sarah replied with a knowing smile. "They'll claim credit for our success while forgetting they nearly destroyed it." Yet despite the article's self-serving tone, its publication represented something significant: official recognition of what they had built, protection through visibility rather than secrecy. As afternoon approached, their extended community gathered for a celebration marking 5 years since the twins' birth. Tables set beneath cottonwood trees groaned with food representing multiple traditions. Apache flatbread alongside Margaret's Boston baked beans. Mexican chiles rellenos beside venison prepared in the old ways. Ishtun, now moving more slowly but still sharp-eyed and authoritative, directed the younger women in serving while entertaining the children with stories that switched fluidly between Apache, English, and Spanish. Though her wound from Fletcher's bullet had left her with a pronounced limp, she had emerged from that conflict with enhanced status, a respected elder whose courage had helped secure their future. As twilight approached, Nakohe called for everyone's attention. With ceremonial dignity, he presented the cradle to Sarah, who accepted it with appropriate reverence. "5 winters have passed since our sons came to us in time of battle," he announced, his English now nearly as fluent as his Apache. "This cradle is for children yet to come, for all families of our canyon to use when new life arrives." The gift represented more than beautiful craftsmanship. It symbolized permanence, continuity, the expectation of generations to follow in this place they had defended so fiercely. Later, after celebrations concluded and the twins finally surrendered to sleep, Sarah and Nakohe sat together on the porch of their home. The canyon spread before them, bathed in moonlight that silvered the landscape into an ethereal domain between worlds, much like the community they had created. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, leaning against the solid warmth of his shoulder. "When I first appeared with my desperate bargain?" Nakohe considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "No," he finally admitted. "Expected arrangement only. Practical exchange." His arm encircled her, drawing her closer. "Found much more." "We both did," Sarah agreed softly. The bargain that had begun their journey, "I give you strong sons, you give me safety," had fulfilled itself in ways neither could have anticipated. The sons had indeed come, strong and thriving. The safety had been secured, not just physical protection but a deeper security, the creation of a place where both could exist fully, neither diminished by the other's presence. But what had started as transaction had transformed into something far more profound: partnership, respect, and eventually a love that bridged seemingly insurmountable differences of culture and experience. In offering each other exactly what was needed in a moment of desperation, they had unknowingly laid the foundation for something that would outlast them both. A new way of being, a template for possibility in a fractured world. As night deepened around them, Nakohi and Sarah remained on their porch, two unlikely souls who had found in each other not just survival but the rarest gift of all. A home created precisely from what the world had insisted could never belong together.